Hi, good evening. Welcome, everyone. My name is Danielle Goldman. I'm the current dance program director here at Lang. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you to Artwork, a lecture series curated by theater professor Bonnie Marenka, which invites innovative artists to Lang to speak about their artistic process. Tonight's guest artist is Ishmael Houston-Jones, a choreographer, improviser, author, teacher, curator. Houston-Jones has taught at Lang on numerous occasions, and he's joining us again this semester as the dance program's artist in residence. In that capacity, he'll be working with a group of 14 students throughout the semester, creating a work for performance at New York Live Arts in May. Given this residency, I thought I might start with a brief story. We held an audition for Ishmael's course back in November, a few days after the presidential election. As you can imagine, there was a mix of exhaustion, disillusionment, and uncertainty in the room. To get things started, Ishmael asked for some pop music. He wasn't picky, and Molly Purstel, the current movement research artist in residence, provided something by Katy Perry. Ishmael asked each of the students to stand facing front and consider someone who was once in their life, who is in their life no longer. The students met the challenge of this deceptively straightforward score. Some of them started to cry fiercely, while others navigated a quickly shifting emotional terrain, moving from laughter to tears to clenched fists. At one point, my colleague Neil Greenberg and I looked at each other, wondering if we might need to intervene on behalf of the students who were clearly in the intense throes of the score. But we watched, fascinated by the performance and confident in Ishmael's remarkable skills as a teacher. Once everyone had a chance to perform the score, Ishmael thanked them for their work and invited everyone to scream. Raucous sounds echoed through the basement studio. Ishmael joined in the mix, baring his teeth, screaming and stomping along with the students. I too began to gasp and yelp, and I was reminded that Houston-Jones is a veteran dance artist whose work has long engaged questions of loss and risk, always seeming to rush into the intensity of its time. When observing this audition, I was reminded of a work called Dead that Houston-Jones made in 1981, for which he recorded an improvised list of every death that he could imagine occurring in his lifetime. For the performance, he would fall down to the floor with each spoken name, rising before the next name was uttered. Houston-Jones has referred to the work as a ritual of endurance. In watching Dead, one sees a body exhausting itself, and one is able to glimpse what would become career-long interests in improvisation and in scores that create opportunities for experiencing dance as a series of live negotiations rather than merely as representation. Contact improvisation, a partnered form that developed in the 70s, was an important part of Houston-Jones' early training, and one can see evidence of that practice in his work. But Houston-Jones has never been an artist content with orthodoxy. I have to say, it's funny having him right in the front row. As I'm saying these things, I feel a little self-conscious. Hope I'm doing okay. Never content with orthodoxy, and his approach to improvisation has consistently recognized the multiple ways in which politics and power affect our dancing. In 1983, Houston-Jones and his longtime collaborator, Fred Holland, performed an untitled duet for a mini festival at Dance Space Project commemorating the 10th anniversary of contact improvisation. For the performance, Houston-Jones and Holland created a manifesto that set out to break every one of contact improvisation's rules. According to Holland and Houston-Jones, the first rule they broke was by being Black, and they wore street clothes and boots. They talked, used a loud sound score, and remained out of contact for much of the time. I'll just say that while the dance, I've been watching the footage a lot over the past year. I was teaching a class called New York Dance in the 80s, so I spent a lot of time at the New York Public Library studying Ishmael Houston-Jones's work and its documents. And there's a way in which that duet undeniably demonstrates the negotiation of various strictures, the whiteness of contact improvisation and its practitioners being the most clearly articulated by the score, but it's not merely a dance that's reducible to its refusal or the figures it rejects. The entangled improvisatory nature of Houston-Jones and Holland's work is palpable, punctuated by moments of exquisite counterpoint, tenderness, and surprise. Houston-Jones and Holland would go on to receive a Bessie Award for their 1984 work, Cowboys, Dreams, and Ladders. And in 1985 and 86, Houston-Jones would work together with musician Chris Cochran and writer Dennis Cooper to create Them, a performance made as the AIDS crisis was intensifying in New York. Houston-Jones received a second Bessie Award for the 2010 revival of Them, which considered how a younger generation of artists was relating to the ongoing effects of HIV and AIDS. Lucky for all of us in the dance field, through his work as a curator, Houston-Jones has extended many of the questions posed in his work for us all to consider. In 1982, he curated a series of performances called Parallels, bringing together the work of African-American choreographers working beyond the Alvin Ailey tradition of Black dance. 30 years later, in 2012, Houston-Jones curated a second Parallels series as a platform at Dance Space Project, exploring relations between choreographers of the African diaspora and postmodern choreography. In his curatorial statement, Houston-Jones referred back to a question posed by the dance scholar Brenda Dixon Gottschild. What images come to mind's eye when the term Black dance is said? Houston-Jones continues, "This has been my conundrum when curating this platform. How would I have answered her question?" This past fall, Houston-Jones and Will Rawls co-curated Platform 2016 Lost and Found to explore themes of AIDS, absence, and queer performance, particularly among communities of color. The platform brought together over 80 artists in a series of screenings, performances, and events, and it opened deep spaces of mourning, reflection, and a sense of shared purpose. How, asked Houston-Jones, might one recover the loss of a generation of mentors, role models, and muses? As Houston-Jones recently reflected on his approach to curation, it's about finding the right question and then finding connectivity between different answers. In closing, I'll just add that one is as likely to hear young people exclaiming about Houston-Jones as artists and curators of his own generation. To my mind, this is a testament to Houston-Jones' ongoing mentorship, both inside and outside of official institutions. He curates the Draft Work series at Dance Space Project, an informal performance series that offers choreographers an opportunity to share their work at various stages of development, and he shows up to see just about everything. In his own words, Houston-Jones notes, "I'm a subversive teacher. I plant ideas, propositions, possibilities, and impossibilities into students' awareness. I rarely offer my opinions of work. Even when I'm a mentor, I ask a lot of questions." We're all lucky to have Ishmael Houston-Jones with us this semester. Our questions will likely be more adventurous, more urgent, and more deeply felt as a result. And with that, I'll just say, help me in welcoming Ishmael Houston-Jones.
Thanks, Danielle. I hope I can live up to that. First of all, I have horrible mic technique. I'd like everyone to put their 2 feet on the floor. And perhaps put your hands on your knees or thighs. And close your eyes. Just for a second, take a deep breath. Let it out. Take one more deep breath. Let it out. Feel what your feet feel like on the floor, what your bum feels like in the chair, what your clothing feels like against your skin, and what the air in this room feels like against your exposed skin. Just want us all to be totally physically present here. You can open your eyes and do whatever you want. Thank you. Actually, I need to get my glasses. 1 second. So as a counter-narrative to Danielle's beautiful introduction, I want to read another one. It's something I wrote in 2004 as the Second Gulf War was raging. And it's called Vigils. It's a little bit long, but I'll read quickly. One Saturday morning in 1967, I joined a small group of Quakers standing in silent opposition to the escalating war in Vietnam. We stood on a downtown street next to the Capitol grounds of my native Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I was a high school junior. My mother was worried about my safety. My father, a veteran, did not approve. Some yahoos yelled at us from cars. I remember some tossed tomatoes. I don't remember exactly what led me to tumble out of bed that weekend morning and to stand silent with a group of white strangers gathered around a solitary banner. I don't remember the exact words on the banner, but I'm certain this decision on that Saturday became the foundation of my social, political activism that is carried forth till today. I spent several afternoons and evenings a week after that manning the tiny Harrisburg area Peace Center storefront, hanging out with older activists, street people, hippies, and hippie wannabes. I handed out leaflets, did my homework, and talked with anyone who straggled through the door. An End the War Now bumper sticker was affixed to my notebook for the rest of the school year. I remember waking up to do my morning paper route one June morning in 1968 to be the first in my family to learn of the assassination of Robert Kennedy. Martin Luther King had been murdered earlier that spring. That summer, I worked for the political campaign of Eugene McCarthy, volunteering at the Market Square headquarters. I remember watching on a black and white TV with my fellow volunteers, all of us in shock as the police rioted in Chicago streets during the Democratic Convention. I remember spending the night in Perry Square in Erie, Pennsylvania in 1969, now a college freshman. I was part of a group taking turns reading the names of the war dead from books the size of telephone directories. I shuddered when it was my turn to read, and I came to Jones Charles, the name of my grandfather, my uncle, and my legal self. I remember a year later stenciling bloody fist on the walls of the college buildings after the murder by National Guardsmen of students at Kent State and the always parenthetical Jackson State. I remember that when the first Vietnam War draft lottery was drawn, my birthday, June 8th, was number 366 out of 366, but I was 1 year too young to be included. When the subsequent lottery was drawn, June 8th was number 7, but deferments were still given to college students. During my draft physical, I was given a 1Y, the "don't call us, we probably won't call you," after talking to the Army shrink about psychedelic drug use, sexual orientation, and a lame suicide attempt. I dropped out of college to travel the world. I remember after spending most of a year on kibbutz in Israel, marching in the May Day parade in Tel Aviv, chanting in Hebrew, "What is good for the worker is good for Israel." I think it's something like Masha Tov LaHapolin, Tov LaIsrael. I remember marches in Washington in the 1980s for gay rights, against the Klan, for the rights of Palestinians to determine their future, in solidarity with the people of El Salvador. I remember chanting, sore feet, and the smell of tear gas. I remember marching up Fifth Avenue with my boyfriend on Gay Pride. I remember marching up Fifth Avenue with my girlfriend against nukes. I remember standing in front of the United States Embassy in Managua singing a song that one of my fellow artists had written to counter our government's support of the Contras. I remember denouncing the U.S. support of that statement in a statement I gave on Managua radio. I remember trying to combine my politics, my art making, and sometimes succeeding. I danced naked to the sound score of pro-American jingoist songs. I wrestled with a dead goat on a bare mattress. I crawled across a stage on my back, blindfolded, a light glaring in my face, a heavy cement block on my chest. In the 1990s, I remember marching against the spread of AIDS and our government's apathy toward the pandemic. I remember once or twice a week delivering food to people left homebound by the disease. I remember not accepting my National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship because of an anti-homoerotic and obscenity clause had been added. A year later, someone at the staff of the NEA allowed me to obtain the funds without signing. I remember getting on with my life, burying parents, buying a home, archiving my work, combining my politics and my art, and making a money-making job out of it. And then last night I stood in the rain in Union Square in New York. I stood there with a few hundred people in what passes for a silent candlelight vigil marking the 1,000th American soldier killed in the war in Iraq. I found my friend Lucy with her 1.5-year-old daughter, Annabelle Claire. At home, Lucy has a photograph of her parents with her and her siblings at a Vietnam War protest. I took a picture of Lucy and Annabelle to be a companion image to that other photo, a sad but resilient continuum. As I stood in the rain trying to keep my votive candle lit and counting the number of colored folks present, never enough compared to the brown faces next to the obits in the papers, this deluge of memories flooded over me. From that Saturday morning in the late 60s to last evening, I've been doing this in some form for too long. As some of the crowd sang quietly, anemically, "We shall overcome, where have all the flowers gone, and give peace a chance," I thought to myself, I'm tired. I'm so tired. A double-decker tour bus stopped at the traffic light, and our crowd turns, raises peace signs, and sings louder, stronger. Cameras flash on both sides. The bus drives on. I'm tired. I'm so tired. That was 10th September 2004. So a lot of times when my students ask me, like, how did you get into dance? How did you start dancing? This is sort of my answer, that people don't spring up as artists like wholly formed, that there's a past, there's something that has to live within the artist in order for the artist to make art. There needs to be something about which one makes art. And this was my journey. There are many other journeys. I usually tell my students to start by pig farming, which is something I did in Israel, of all places. Yeah. If you're going to make art, I think it's really important to have a sense of self and who you are and what you're about. And like all of the things I mentioned there are much more important than that one semester of ballet I took and didn't do very well with. So Danielle alluded to the piece, the untitled duet, which is sometimes called Ugala, that Fred and I did. Fred died about a year ago today, actually. And we were trying to be the bad boy punks of contact improvisation. It's usually performed by white people in bare feet and unfashionable, baggy clothes with no sound score. And Fred and I did decide, we actually have a poster the poster is from Danielle's exhibition at the Institute for Contemporary Art in Philadelphia. It's called Endless Shout, and Fred and I, there is our score for this dance. So I want to just show you like 4 minutes. The dance itself is about 17 minutes long, and predicated by the sound score. Like this. So the following year, Fred and I did a piece called Cowboy Streams and Ladders, in which we sort of added to the danger,
Yes.
the danger element.
Not a mad old.
Who's that? Who the hell? The danger element of the dance because we put metal spurs on the backs of our boots. The piece was about reclaiming the mythology and reality of the black cowboy, of the black cowboy who's been erased from the history of the taming of the American West. Fred found a documentary film about an all-black rodeo in Boley, Oklahoma. And we actually found a black cowboy in the Bronx, Carlos Foster, who had a riding program for African American and Hispanic youth, and we got to ride horses in the Bronx with him, which was real cool. I'm trying to think of where I should go next. I don't know who this person is. The screen is really big. The word sheet, the word doc. You just stay here.
Okay, I'll sit next to you.
Please.
That should do it. Let me go up here. View, exit full screen, and then we'll get there.
And relatives is where. So in I can't remember the exact year, I think 82, I was doing a film about a piece, not a film, a piece about family history. And it was called Part 2, Relatives, and it was done on the first Parallel series in 1982. And as I was working on it, I had done a sort of a mock-up of it, and my mother had recorded on my Walkman, which was very poor quality, a history of our family. And I was going to do it again, and I was going to do it in New York. So I said, "Oh, Mom, I have to come down to Harrisburg and re-record you because the recording's not bad." And she said, "Well, I'm coming to see it. I could always do it live, you know." And my mother, who was not a performer at all, and I said, "Okay." So in the original piece, my mother's sitting in the audience, and at some point I have a question about my family history, and I go and I pick her up and throw her over my shoulders, and I interview her. In 1989, the filmmaker Julie Dash made a video version, a film video version of this for the PBS series Alive from Off Center. And I'm just going to, it's 8 minutes, but I'm going to show you the whole thing because it's hard to break up, so.
Mariah, this show looks really mild.
Miles,
A little bit too
Laura,
like it's almost like
Matthew, Martha,
Albert,
Mariah, Miles,
Alice,
Laura,
Luther,
Matthew, Martha, Mariah, Miles,
Earl,
Laura,
Albert,
Albert,
the conceptual idea of
Matthew,
Charles,
Martha,
Isaac,
Mariah,
when there really wasn't
Miles,
part
Laura,
North,
Albert, Alice, Pauline, Chuck.
The water imagery, I don't really understand it. Like, I'm not sure if it's like part of what something I would choose to do. What's wrong? I mean, the life vest was my idea, so I do. But I really don't. I don't know. I worry about prettiness, or somehow I can spend years and something too, yeah, I don't know, attractive. Stuff in the house in a lot. I don't remember.
She'd never seen a camera before. That's what I think. Alice Trussell sat, the fingers on her left hand stretched out long, tenuous, touching her husband Albert's knee. I think she'd never seen a camera before.
Albert Houston sat next to his wife, Alice Trussell, a big brimmed hat on his left knee, his walking stick stuck through. Their children stood behind them. Glass eye of a big camera looking directly at her. Photo. Die. I think she'd never seen a camera before. Alice and Albert lived down there. I live up here. How did I get here? Luther and Pearl Ann had 3 children, 3 daughters. They had 5 children, 3 daughters. One daughter gave me a copy of this photo. She stands there.
Are you going to drop me?
Oh.
I told you I had gained weight, that you shouldn't try this trick again.
This is my mom. Hi.
Hi.
I'm not going to drop you. Stop.
Okay, but I told you I had gained...
Okay, down we go. 1, 2, 3.
Whoa. Now, that wasn't so easy.
Okay, just sit in the chair. And there are eggs over there. There's dye here. And give me a couple of minutes, okay?
Okay.
Okay?
A couple of minutes for what?
Well, I don't know. I just thought I would start dancing and you could start talking now.
Okay. Ishmael wanted to know how he got up here from there. It was very simple. I got here. I'm an incurable romantic, and I believe that somewhere on this planet Earth we meet our soulmates. I was born in the Red Hills of Mississippi. A couple of years later, his father was born in the Mississippi Delta, some 200 miles away. But we were not to meet until 24 years later, 1,000 miles from Mississippi, in a bathroom in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Yes, in the bathroom. And as a result of that meeting, Ishmael Houston-Jones got here. However, at that point in time, he was Charles Houston-Jones. Charles for his paternal grandfather, and Houston for my maiden name. I was the last Houston, and I was reluctant to give up the name. And long before Alex Haley went out in search of his roots, I was determined that my Chuck would know his roots and his ancestors. We have to be careful when we start looking at our family tree, though. We might find royalty and outlaws sprouting from the same roots sometime. But the one time, the reason we have this egg here, I took him down. He had never been to the farm before. And once he saw that the eggs came from the barn instead of the supermarket, he wouldn't eat them anymore. Then came Easter, and he ate the Easter eggs. And I got the bright idea if he would eat Easter eggs, maybe he would eat any colored eggs. I tried it, and sure enough, he wasn't as smart as he thought he was. It worked. He's been eating eggs ever since. Do you remember that?
No.
Well, good. There are a lot of things you don't remember. Some would be best if I didn't remember them. Like the time you got lost in the store. I told him one thing, if he got lost, to go back where we started from, and eventually I would come back there. Well, he remembered to go back where we started from, but I didn't. This little boy was too little for me to see him in the aisles of the supermarket, so I was running up and down the aisle looking for him. Then finally I thought we should go back where we started from. And I went back there, and there stood this pitiful-looking child, and I looked at him, and I said to him, "Little boy, are you lost?" And he said, "My mommy lost me." And he looked and saw it was I, and he got very angry with me. He got angry with me a lot of times, but then he got over that, too.
How much time do I have?
Oh, not very much. What are you going to do in this time?
Oh, I don't know. Well, give me another minute or so.
Okay. Oh, dance your little heart out while you're doing that.
Okay. All she talked about was the fact that, well, not all she talked about, but the main gist of her monologue that night was about
When do you want me to call you?
Whenever I'm finished.
I'll call you before you're finished, because it always takes you a while to get finished. It takes you a while to wind down. So, is it time? Okay. Chuck? 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 That kid would never come when you call him. Chuck? 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 Chucky!
So, down in the piece, I'm not going to show you this part of the piece, but in the piece I've danced with dead goats, and I've danced with cement blocks. But improvising with my mother unscripted was probably the scariest thing I've ever done. That story about the eggs, after the first time, and she could improvise. She could say, she had 10 minutes to say whatever she wanted. Don't do that with your mother. She told this story about the eggs the first time I heard the story about the eggs and the colored eggs. And I said, I don't remember that. She said, well, I just made that up. My mother was lying on stage. It was also the first tour I ever took as a soloist, and I was doing this piece, so I had to go on tour with my mother. And I was doing another piece in which I wasn't wearing clothes. And my task in that is to ignore her as best I can, because, yeah, that's what the piece is about. And I could just hear her talking about me in the dress rehearsal, and the fact that in the dress rehearsal I wore gym shorts, and she thought that was much better. And the fact that then she corrected herself, not corrected, she clarified, saying, well, of course, I've seen him naked, but it's been a very long time since then. So, yeah. I feel this is like a very important piece, and just because it involves several elements. It involves this sort of fictionalized autobiography. It involves both vocal and movement improvisation, in which it was never the same any time it was performed. It involves risk, like asking mom to do this. So it's sort of like a synthesis of like all the things I've been working on since. The piece was originally made in 1985, 86, and revived in 2010. And this is just sort of the opening of it once we get past the credits. So the piece was made in the height of the AIDS crisis, or what is called the AIDS crisis, what we name the AIDS crisis. And in reviving the piece, it was very, it was interesting to revive it with people who were in their 20s now, some of them weren't born in 1985 when the piece was made. And a lot of the rehearsal process, because the piece is improvised by these guys, was actually trying to relate that time to them. This opening part wasn't in the original, but it's sort of like me passing on the piece to them. And it should start sometime soon. Just checking the sound. There are also elements of contact improvisation in this, as well as just regular improvisation. I've also noticed that there are a lot of pieces in which I'm blindfolded. And this is one of them in which the dancer who is sort of dancing the part that I would have in the 80s. One of the motifs that recur in the piece is sort of the checking of lymph nodes, sort of in the throat and underarms and groin. So cool. So it was actually kind of intense doing that because it was done in the same room that the original piece in the 80s was done. So I was sort of conjuring sort of ghosts of memory of people who were lost from that time onward. And it had this different resonance. The piece was really badly received in the 80s, especially by the gay press. They really hated it a lot. Largely, I think, because it was too close. The AIDS epidemic was ravaging. People were actually dying on a regular basis in this community, in that community. And it was interesting doing it 25 years later. It got standing ovations and people were throwing flowers. I think because of the distance between then and now, then and then. There is a section later which I won't show you. It's sort of a nightmarish section about my fear of death and dying, in which I do a duet with the carcass of a goat, and it became really controversial. People were really protesting. A lot of PETA people were after me and threatening to close the space down in the 80s. And actually, they called the ASPCA, and which told them they couldn't do anything because the animal was already dead. And so they called the Board of Health, and this guy was going to come and inspect. So I called voluntary lawyers for the arts and asked them what I should do. And they said, well, you should just contact the city on your own and explain what you're doing, because you're not doing anything really wrong, or at least wrong legally. So I called the Department of Health and talked to, I think his name was Bernie, this guy, a bureaucrat. And so I started explaining to him about the symbolism of Christian mythology, of signifiers, and went on about AIDS and death and my fear of death. And Bernie really wasn't that interested. And the piece was only going to go on for one more weekend. So he asked me, Mr. Jones, how long is this going to go on for? And I said, this next weekend. And he was going to have to come in from wherever he lived on the weekend to inspect this piece of this black man dancing with a dead goat, which he didn't actually want to do. You could tell, He said, you got one more week, eh? And I said, yeah, one more weekend. He said, Mr. Jones, I'm going to let you slide this time. But Mr. Jones, take my advice, find another act. Which I had a T-shirt made saying that, like, Mr. Jones, find another act. But I think actually, and I didn't think about it at the time, but there is this sort of disconnectivity between my life working as a pig farmer in Israel and working in the slaughterhouse. I didn't actually slaughter. I would sort of lead the animals to the slaughterhouse, go out and go to eat lunch, and then come back and have to measure their back fat, because it was Israel and pigs are not kosher. I was actually working for the Institute of Animal Research, which translates to pig farm in English. And it was very profitable because there are only 2 places in the country that raise pigs for eating, and this kibbutz was one of them. It was a very far left-wing kibbutz. And but I think there is this sort of history of me and animal carcasses and fear of death. I can't even throw out mouse traps. I'm really afraid of dead things.
The piece with your mom really struck me. Why did she make up a story? Just because from what you set up, it sounds like she would have had a more literal take on, okay, I have a task, I need to provide a narrative about Ishmael's life. And what do you think compelled her, and why did you keep that? Why did you keep this narrative that she created on the spot? Why did the egg narrative continue through the tour?
Good question. I think she was nervous. I mean, she was not a performer. She was a payroll auditor for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and had never performed before. So I think she was nervous about performing. So this is sort of the answer to the first part of your question, that she needed something to hold on to, I mean, she would go off and go to very interesting places. I mean, I would like hear her talking about her cat or her trip to the Soviet Union, or all kinds of odd things would come out. But the egg thing, I think I don't know if I asked her to do it when we were filming or not. I like it because it is a lie, and I like the fact that my mom lied. And I think that's a really good thing to have over her when she was alive. And I think it's an interesting story, and I think it's like sort of like, it's a typical story. It's not so untrue. I mean, I was that kind of kid that was very stubborn about my eating habits, and she was the kind of trickster mom who would do things to get me to eat things. So it's not that far from the truth. It's just the specifics of Easter are not real. Cool. Over there.
All the mics in the world. Okay. Hi.
Hi.
How did you, when you were emerging, or how would you recommend to an emerging artist that's getting into improvise-based, dance-based work, how to articulate to potential funders, producers, grants, and all that, the type of work that you're doing? You yourself are established now, and everyone, I'm sure, knows who you are. And your work. Not everyone every single person in the world. No, but you know what I mean. Like as an emerging artist, and I'm trying to make this like broad, but I'll use myself as an example. So like, I have a background in dance. I'm a flamenco dancer, but I'm really redefining my work, right?
Right.
So cool. And it's based in improv, and the process of improvised based fill in the blank, right? I have a hard time articulating that. And especially as someone that is known for one type of work, how did you or would you recommend someone emerging into that work to best articulate to someone that doesn't know what I'm doing to give me money?
Yeah. Well, now in 2017, I think improvisation is much less radical than it was when I was coming up. I mean, people really, had this like attitude about it, like, oh, that's not real dance because the steps aren't set and you don't do it the same way every time. I think that's that attitude isn't so prevalent now. I think you guys, you have video. I mean, seeing the work live is always better, but seeing the work in video, having good videos. Actually, I tell my classes that, like, more people will probably see your work on video than will see it live. So when you get documentation of your work, to actually get really good documentation of your work. And I'm not sure how to tell you how to articulate it. I mean, it just takes a really clear idea, like really to think about what you're doing and how you're presenting it, how the work is presented, what you want the work to present. And look at the work yourself, again, on video, or if it involves other people, step back and look at it and really try to find the it of it. Like, what is the kernel? What is the truth of it? Why are you doing it? What are you hoping that it says? What is it saying to you? How does it speak to you? How does it fulfill you? And just really try to write that down and be persuasive and be good.
I'm just wondering if you could speak more on what the process of restaging works like them is when you're using dancers who weren't even alive when the work first premiered, and you're doing work that's improvisation and has roles, like you as an improviser having a new dancer do like a kind of quotation of like your improvisation. How do you find that process, or what?
It's a very interesting process. I think that was the first time I ever actually did it. We held an audition to find dancers, and what we were looking for were people who could improvise and were willing to put themselves out there. And we wanted people who, a range of looks and people. I was very long into the process before I showed them the 1980s video, because I didn't want them to imitate or try to embody those people. I wanted them to bring their own work to it. What surprised, Dennis lives in Paris now, so he came in late to the rehearsal period. Chris and I found a lot of what we did, and some of the original dancers came into rehearsals also, just to talk, and to talk about what AIDS meant in the 80s and what the fear and anger and frustration about that was, and trying to communicate other things like the joy of being a gay guy in the 70s, cruising on the street as opposed to cruising on your phone, which I don't understand. And talking about homophobia, talking about gay bashing, talking about a range of things. I mean, a lot of the rehearsal process was talking and moving together. I mean, people who can in fact be intimate, and not intimate in a sexual way, but intimate in a like body-to-body way, and getting them used to that. There are many different exercises that lend themselves to that. And I think that was sort of it. And it was done, we revived it. We got a residency at the New Museum, revived it in 4 weeks. Because the dance is not largely set or hardly set at all, it was easy. It was sort of it was easier to do it really quickly. But yeah, that was sort of the main thrust of that. The piece I did last fall, which was called Variations on Themes by the work of of Lost and Found and Other Works by John Byrne, which was about the choreographer John Byrne, who passed away in 1988 at age 35 from AIDS. It was slightly different because we were working with actually his material and watching videos and sort of reproducing or reinterpreting or reimagining his work, and also imagining what his work would have become if he had lived on. But we actually had the dancers actually watch those tapes and actually tell stories and read, do research. We created a dossier of information that we gave them, which included his own journal writing. He was a prolific writer, and his drawings and reviews and things that were written about him. And so they could sort of enmesh themselves or engross themselves in his life and his work. So that was a slightly different process. And just a third example, there's the piece Dead that Danielle talked about, which I did it was a celebration for my 30th birthday when I recorded the names of all the deaths. And there were deaths that were real and deaths that it was like Superman and Lassie were also on the list because they died while I was alive. And 3 popes, I think. And I revived that in Philadelphia with a dancer, again, who was not alive when I made that piece. And I asked him I had him make his own list of every death he could remember, and just giving him the score if he had to fall down and get up as each name was said. And that was the score. And I gave him notes about how the falling could be, how they could be iconic of the name, but largely let him do it himself. I mean, it's a very simple score. It's exhausting. It goes on for 10 minutes of falling down, getting up, falling down, getting up with each name, and the names start coming faster. So those are just 3 examples of reviving work. Thanks. Full.
I'm really interested in your movement background. And could you say something more other than, if there is more, other than contact improv?
Oh, sure.
What?
Okay, my first dance class was when I was a junior in high school. William Penn High School in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. My friend Susan Laurie, who I'm still in contact with, who's in the dance department at Wesleyan University. I was a theater nerd, and I was I was a thespian. And she knew that, and she said the community theater, the Harrisburg area community theater, was offering free dance classes to teenagers, so I'd never taken a dance class before in my life, but I thought, it could be fun. I mean, I didn't like sports, but I liked being active, and I wore tights and everything, and it was sort of like a jazzy. They were training dancers to do musicals, basically. So I was doing this, kind of thing. I can still do that. So that was my first exposure. So my last 2 years and also took fencing as part of that program. So I can. Then I went to school as an English major because I thought I was going to be a novelist or a journalist. So I went to a school that didn't have a dance program. And a lot of my early performing was in the streets because it was during the Vietnam War. And I was an activist. So I did street theater, which sort of led to improvisational things. Then I moved to Israel. And when I worked 9 months at the pig farm, but then I moved to a banana plantation on the Lebanese border. I remember this, that sort of every day we would get up at 4 in the morning and go to the banana plantation and cut bananas down. And we would go to the Mediterranean and I would just sort of dance on the beach naked. And that was sort of my daily practice when I was in, and it's sort of like this dance thing was sort of there. So when I came back to the States, I didn't go back to college. I sort of broke my parents' hearts and dropped out of college. Accidentally, because I didn't plan on staying in Israel for a year. And I moved to Philadelphia and I took regular modern classes, sort of Hawkins-based, Horton, which I don't like. But then I got into a company called Group Motion Media Theater, where Group Motion Media Theater was founded by 3 immigrants from Berlin who were the ensemble of the Mary Wigman Company. So they did sort of Wigman and there were improvisation structures were part of it. There were a lot of games, even in performance. There were a lot of rules to remember. And I was with that's the only company I've ever been in, and I was in for 2 years. At the same time, I was also taking like Afro-Caribbean at Arthur Hall's African American Dance Foundation. And I dropped out of that company, and another person who had dropped out was Terry Fox. And Terry and I began improvising with a group of musicians. And we did some very open, we would just jam and then do a performance, and that was sort of it. And that was really great, but became limiting because it was always just sort of dancing with the musicians and just sort of doing that. So I felt like my writer side wanted to do more. There was more of a narrative that I wanted to get out. So I began making pieces. That's sort of the journey. There's something in the back.
I'm just curious about like archiving your work and how we're like watching these pieces and clearly the experience is not the same as when they were, performed. But now that things are getting like, so high def, I mean, obviously there's no replacement for like performative experience, but I'm sort of wondering like how you're archiving work now and sort of like the process in which you're sort of documenting your stuff.
Mainly video. Most of my work, because I had these VHS and 3/4-inch tapes in my apartment that were getting ruined because of the heat fluctuation. And the New York City Public Library, Performing Arts Library at Lincoln Center has been digitizing things, so I donated most of my work to them. So in that sense, they're being made digital. It's not the same piece. I write about the pieces a lot. There are notes and notebooks, and they have scraps, clippings of folders of clippings. I call them scraps. Folders of clippings of like reviews and things that have been written about the work. But dance is really hard. It's really hard. I mean, there is no substitute for the live art experience. So, I mean, there are dances that are made for the camera, and that's sort of a hybrid thing, that it's more of a film that's a dance, that's the art. The art is making the dance for a camera. But live art is really impossible to catch. And I found that out really in trying to do John Byrne's work last year. It's like, I was looking at his work. I had been in 3 of his pieces, but there were pieces I weren't in. There were pieces I had seen as an audience member and pieces I hadn't. And the pieces I hadn't, it was really hard to get the essence. Fortunately, I knew him and I knew what he was coming out of and where the work was generated from. But yeah, I don't know how, in 30 years, someone will do that. I actually considered trying to do relatives, but putting my mother on carrying a monitor around, and I think that's a really bad idea. Anything else? Or? Oh, here's one.
You did have? Oh.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the relation between writing and dance, because unfortunately I don't know much about dancing, but I do try to experiment with writing, and I was just wondering how the two creative processes compare. Like, to you, was like writing less satisfactory and like expressing something than dancing was? Or, and also just the whole process of like looking back on your performance, the same way you look back at a piece of writing and be like, oh, I could have like conveyed that emotion better with a move, or, like, or with a word, like.
And for me, it's very, very similar. There are people from my class here. Hi. And they know I start all of my dance classes with writing, with a 5-minute free write. I have the students write for 5 minutes, pieces that aren't going to be shared with anyone, just to get words, getting a familiarity with like words to paper. It's a good exercise for anyone, but I think it's really good for dancers just to begin to put words to where they are. So, and that's the sort of way I write. The piece I read to you, the vigils, I just came home after that protest and just, wrote, and then I refined it and I edited it. But I think the process of making written work for me personally is very similar to how I make dances. It's very improvisational, very in the moment. In my dances, I've refined scores in my dances. When I redid them, there were tweaks that I made in the improvisational score. So for me, it's very similar. It's a very similar feeling. I find both equally satisfying. I'm a really good writer. I'm a really bad editor. And I think that springs from my improvisational background. I can get words on the paper, and I really love that. I get really high from it. But when I have to go back and actually pay attention to grammar or spelling or syntax or even structure, I find that much more difficult. But the act of writing, the act of like putting it down there or putting it out there, either speaking it or writing it, it's like I get exhilarated doing it. And it's a lot less wear and tear on the body as well. Did I answer that?
Yeah. Do you write poetry at all? Sorry.
I write something that's like poetry. It's more like prose. It's like when I chop up my prose. and I call it poetry, but it's not really.
Where? Hello.
Hello.
So you were speaking about these artists have this like innate disposition, this internal disposition that needs to be articulated. So I'm wondering, yes, you have the pen and the paper to articulate, but do you have a, I don't know why science is coming up, but do you have some sort of technique other than like micro movements in order to help convey this?
I think presence, like the very first thing I had you all do, just sort of like closing your eyes, feeling what you're feeling, smelling what you're smelling, hearing what you're hearing, and really on a micro level, really being aware of the projector, and my voice, and the heating element, the feel of the air conditioner against your skin, of really going into those places. For movement and for writing actually, but of really being mindful of where you are at any given moment, and being ready to accept that and ready to act upon it.
Yes, and with the acting upon these sort of things. So you were talking about being this like Americano cowboy sort of thing, and then you go to Israel. Like who does that? Like really?
I did.
For real.
It's
so
like.
How was it bringing this spice to like Israel, and also being safe, because you know, being gay isn't always the most safest thing. So
yeah, I mean, those were things that I did, and I think the one thing my parents gave me was, I'm a spoiled only child, is that I could do anything I wanted to. That they expected me to fulfill whatever I wanted to fulfill, and they were sort of heartbroken when I dropped out of college, but they accepted that. And you know, I didn't intend to go. Like, my plan wasn't to go to Israel, or wasn't to stay in Israel. I was in Europe for the summer between my sophomore and junior years of college. I was traveling around. A friend of mine from high school had emigrated back to Israel. I went to visit her. She had gone from being a hippie flower child to an Israeli soldier, so that didn't work out. And I was sort of a budding young socialist, so I wanted to just, you know, be on a kibbutz for like a week or so just to see what it's like. And I had never done heavy farm work before. I'd never gotten up at 4 a.m, worked for 8 hours for 50 cents a day, you know. So I found it really thrilling in an odd way, and I was really willing to accept that and to stay. And the impulse to stay was just there. A lot of the work does reference gay. I'm going to sort of like the range of sexualities I embody. And it's just a part of my biography, like being black, like being an American, like all of that's a part of it. And at certain points, some of those are foregrounded and some of those are not. And it changes from piece to piece, but just being really mindful and present and willing to embrace the presence, your presence.
yes, because that first practice in the beginning was wonderful. Like, I was just like, yes, like I'm in my body sort of thing, because there's just so much going on, you know. So I was walking around today and I'm seeing these like hearts on the ground, and I'm with it. Like, I'm here for that. And it seems to be almost like a sprouting, I mean, maybe I'm being pessimistic, I don't know, whatever. But it seems like a death culture, and it's really refreshing to see this. So I'm wondering, with this, like, being able to be in your body and to sense these sort of things, has it been like a compass? Like, can you, I don't know, this might sound like woo 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 or something like Sixth Sense, but like,
I think that
can you feel it?
We're living in very trying times now. As Danielle said in the audition, people actually broke. You know, this is one of a sort of a normal exercise I gave, and because it was a couple of days after the election, people were actually sobbing, and I just had them scream, because I think bringing it into the body is really important. Like, having a room full of people just do it, y'all, stand up. And for when I say go, I want you to, for 30 seconds, I'll get my stopwatch out. Yeah. For 30 seconds, I want you to jump and scream for as loud as you can. Ready, go. So yeah, I think in these times we need to be in our bodies and in our souls and in our minds, and just being present is like really, really important. I think I'll end there.
Thank you.